Diane, are you and your husband having problems? My coworker's question caught me off guard, leaving me momentarily speechless. Problems? Well, I suppose we have the usual ups and downs that come with marriage. Why do you ask? I replied, feeling a knot of apprehension forming in my stomach. She hesitated, her gaze shifting to her hands as she deliberated whether to continue. Eventually, she spoke up. Look, I'm not sure how to say this, but my husband took me away for our anniversary last weekend, and I'm pretty sure I saw your husband at the same hotel with another woman. What? Are you sure? That can't be right. He wouldn't do something like that to me. You must be mistaken, I protested, my heart sinking at the possibility. Well, I could be wrong, but it really looked like him. If it wasn't him, then he has a doppelganger out there. We saw them together a few times, looking quite cozy, she explained, her voice tinged with concern. Mark had claimed he was on a fishing trip with his friends last weekend, but now it seemed he may have been casting his line in other waters. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, and disbelief mingled within me. How could he betray our 7 years together for a fling with someone else? Thanking Jane for her honesty, I retreated to my office, sinking into the plush visitor's chair. As I tried to recall any suspicious behavior from Mark, I drew a blank. He hadn't exhibited the typical signs of infidelity, no sudden affection or unusual attentiveness. Was he deliberately hiding these signs, aware that they might raise suspicions? I wrestled with doubt and confusion. It couldn't be true, could it? Jane must have mistaken someone else for Mark. Yet, the nagging uncertainty lingered. What if it was him? How could I confront him without solid proof? He'd deny everything, and his friends would likely cover for him if he was having an affair. Recalling Sunday night when he returned home, I searched for clues. He had greeted me with a kiss, grabbed a beer, and recounted his weekend, mentioning the lack of fish. That struck me as odd. Mark was an experienced fisherman, rarely returning empty-handed. Could he be telling the truth, or was it a cover-up? I resolved to subtly inquire about the fishing trip with one of his friend's wives, hoping to uncover the truth without tipping my hand. The phone seemed to ring endlessly before Emily finally answered, just as I was about to hang up. Hi, Emily. Diane Andrews, how are you? I greeted her, trying to sound casual. Our conversation began with the usual topics, kids, school, and the latest sales at the mall. I wanted to avoid raising suspicion, so I let the small talk drag on for about 20 minutes before getting to the real reason for my call. Emily, do you happen to have any interesting trout recipes? I'm looking to try something different from the usual baking and grilling methods. How did you prepare the fish Dave brought home on Sunday? I held my breath, waiting for a response, while Emily hushed her kids in the background. Sorry about that, Diane. As for fish recipes, well, Dave isn't too adventurous with food, so I usually stick to the classics. The fish he caught last weekend are still in the freezer. I hadn't planned on cooking them until later in the week, or maybe I'll grill them over the weekend. As Emily spoke, my mind wandered. Mark had claimed he went fishing, but now it seemed like a lie. The others had caught fish, but he hadn't. Why? Because he hadn't been fishing, he'd been with someone else. When I confronted him, his excuses wouldn't hold water. Diane? Diane? Are you still there? Emily's urgent voice snapped me back to reality, and I quickly wiped away the tears that had started to fall. Yes, I'm here. Sorry, the washing machine is acting up. I have to go. I'll call you later. Thanks for the tips. Bye. My initial urge was to confront Mark, but I realized I lacked solid evidence. He'd deny everything and become more cautious. I needed more proof. That night, over dinner, Mark seemed distant. He praised the meal but lacked his usual energy. When I tried to engage him in conversation, his responses were curt. I hoped it was guilt eating away at him, just as it was tearing me apart. As we watched TV later, Mark made a move. I'm going to bed early. Not feeling well. Are you coming? He asked. No, I'll watch a bit more of this show. The girls at work recommended it. I'll join you later. Good night, I replied, turning away from his attempted kiss. Sorry, honey, can't afford to get sick now. Sweet dreams, I added hastily, hoping he wouldn't suspect anything. My mind was racing with thoughts. There was no way I could bring myself to kiss him after what he'd done. I knew how much Mark loved going down on me. He'd spend hours at it. I couldn't shake the mental image of him doing the same to his lover. It made me sick to my stomach. I endured a mindless sitcom as I waited for him to fall asleep. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I crept up to our bedroom and peeked in on him. His tall frame barely fit our queen-sized bed, and he lay sprawled across it, his head resting on the crumpled pillow pushed almost to the headboard. His hair was damp, clinging to his head and face like a blonde skullcap. Sweat glistened on his body, and the tangled sheets hinted at a restless sleep. Mark was usually a quiet sleeper, but tonight was different. Was it guilt or thoughts of her that disturbed his rest? Damn him. He always slept in the nude, and tonight was no exception. As he lay there, vulnerable, I looked at him differently. I loved this man with all my heart, but now I feared I might lose him. Was it a one-time mistake, or would he cheat again? I had to know, no matter how painful the truth might be. Mark was my first love, the man I wanted to spend my life with, the father of my future children. How could he jeopardize all that? Quietly, I reached for his wallet on the bedside table, hoping to find some clue. Perhaps an address, a phone number, or even condoms. In our dating days, he always kept them in his wallet, although we stopped needing them when I went on the pill. Finding condoms now would be another blow to our marriage. His wallet and pockets yielded nothing, so I moved on to his briefcase and car, but they too revealed nothing incriminating. It felt like a game, each empty search leaving me more disappointed. Next, I checked his email on our home computer, then his cell phone. Still, no luck. Sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, I pondered my next move. Lack of evidence didn't change my conviction of his guilt. I was fueled by a mix of adrenaline and caffeine, determined to uncover the truth. Reflecting on my efforts so far, I concluded that he couldn't be smart enough to erase all traces of his infidelity. I just had to keep searching. It dawned on me suddenly, the evidence must be in his fishing gear. He knew I never touched his fishing equipment out of fear of damaging it, and I had no interest in fishing anyway. In the garage, I searched through his tackle box and accessories, coming up empty-handed except for a couple of hook sticks that only fueled my anger. Just when I was about to give up, I noticed his fishing jacket hanging behind the side door. Carefully, I went through the pockets and finally found what I was looking for, a packet of matches from the Hyatt Hotel in Carlton, a town about 2 hours away. In my emotional state, that was enough evidence to condemn him. We had never visited that hotel together, and I couldn't think of any plausible reason for him to have been there alone. Let's see how he tries to explain this away. As the realization sank in that he had indeed cheated, the real pain set in. For the next 2 hours, I cycled through feelings of anger, frustration, and humiliation. I wanted to storm upstairs, drag him out of bed, and confront him. But that wouldn't be enough. I wanted him to feel the same pain and anguish I was experiencing. As I contemplated my next move, a vengeful idea took shape in my mind. By the time I was ready to go to bed, my plan was nearly complete. I was going to make him pay. I decided to retaliate by sleeping with someone else and then presenting the evidence to Mark. I wanted to show him that I could play his game too. But despite my anger, I still loved him, and the thought of losing him hurt just as much as the idea of him having an affair. I didn't want to divorce him, although my initial reaction was to throw him out onto the street. Finding someone to sleep with was easy. At 32, I still had my looks, and the men in the office often flirted with me. Some of the sales reps even made advances, but I had always turned them down, until now. I set my sights on Andy, a young guy in the office who had the girls drooling over him. He was 21, 6 feet tall, with dark, captivating eyes and a fit physique. Despite his appeal, he seemed unaware of the effect he had on women, which only made him more attractive. I made up my mind, Andy would be my instrument of revenge against Mark. Seducing him shouldn't be too difficult, he was a man, after all. Over the next week, I made my move on Andy, dressing to accentuate my curves and using every opportunity to flirt with him. I found myself receiving a lot of attention, and this time, I welcomed it all. Flirting with the guys made me feel desired and attractive again. Not that Mark hadn't done those things for me, he was always very attentive, surprising me with little gifts, roses, and leaving sweet notes for me to find. It was just the knowledge of his infidelity that had me doubting my allure. This newfound attention was the salve my wounded ego needed. Andy was an easy target. When he first saw me, his jaw dropped, and he stood there staring. Walking up to him, I playfully closed his mouth and in the sexiest voice I could muster, I said, "Impressed, lover? Like what you see? If you play your cards right, you might get to see a lot more. If you're interested, that is." Leaving him to ponder whether he heard me correctly, I turned and sashayed away, accentuating every step with a sway of my hips. This move always elicited a strong reaction from Mark, leading to passionate encounters. Would it have the same effect on Andy? Over the next 3 days, I continued to tease Andy, and he became increasingly attentive and suggestive in his responses. Some of the girls advised me to stop, saying it wasn't fair to Andy, as he wasn't very experienced with women and might misinterpret my actions. Jane, however, saw through my intentions and offered more direct advice. "Diane, what you're doing isn't fair to Andy. He has no clue that you're using him to get back at your husband. If you have to go through with this, at least choose someone who can handle the situation." "Thanks, Jane, but I think Andy will enjoy himself." "Who knows, this might become a regular thing," I replied confidently. Jane just shook her head and walked away, leaving me to proceed with my plan. Before leaving, she offered one final piece of advice that could be a big mistake. Andy was definitely interested, though he hadn't made any moves yet, and I was eager to get things underway. The thought of being with such an attractive guy had me feeling aroused, and going commando was starting to become an issue. I had also shut Mark out from any intimate moments he may have hoped for. Confused by my silence on the matter, he was growing frustrated. I wanted him to sweat a bit, but not for too long. I had decided that Saturday would be the day for my revenge. "Andy, are you free Saturday night?" I asked, already knowing the answer by the look in his eyes. "No, I didn't have any plans." "Why?" he replied, his voice slightly shaky with anticipation. "Well, I was thinking you might want to take a lady out for dinner, dancing, and whatever else the night brings. Would you be interested?" "Absolutely," Andy replied eagerly. Then a shadow crossed his face. "But you're married. What about your husband?" "He doesn't need to know." "Besides, we have an understanding of sorts," I replied, mentally filling in the blanks. "He just doesn't realize it yet." "Sure thing," Andy said, his face lighting up with a knowing grin. "Where would you like to go?" I was thinking dinner at a cozy restaurant, followed by some dancing at a club, and maybe we could find a place afterwards. "If that's all right with you?" Andy blushed but regained his composure, knowing the next move was his. "That sounds like a plan. I know just the spot, and there's a motel nearby. I could book a room if you'd like." "Sounds like a date to me. You can pick me up at the north entrance of the mall parking lot at 7, and we'll take your car." Leaning in to give him a better view, I kissed him on the lips and whispered, "See you then, lover." The plan was set in motion, and I couldn't have stopped it even if I wanted to. Phase 2 was telling Mark I was having a girls' night out and wouldn't be back until late. If Andy lived up to my fantasies, I might not return until Sunday. That evening, after dinner, I dropped the bomb on Mark. "Honey, I spoke to Susan today. She and a few of the girls are going out on Saturday, and I accepted their invitation." "Oh. I was hoping we could have a quiet night together and work through our issues. Can't you go another time?" Giving Mark a stern look, I told him, "I'm going whether you like it or not. I don't get to go out often, and who knows when another opportunity like this will come along. Then again, maybe there will be." Mark started to respond, but thought better of it and left the table. As he walked out, he said, "Thanks for considering my feelings." Then he headed to his workshop, probably to tinker with his fishing gear. I saw the hurt in his eyes and almost relented, but then my anger flared, and I pictured him with some other woman. Screw you, I shouted after him. You don't care about my feelings. He was already gone, and I doubted he heard the last part. The argument seemed to work in my favor because he slept in the spare room for the next 2 nights. If he wasn't careful, it might become his permanent room, I thought before drifting off to sleep. It felt odd, sleeping alone for the first time since we got married. He was gone before I woke up on Friday morning, so I didn't know how he was handling it. I hoped he was suffering. I never realized how vindictive I could be, and it surprised me. On one hand, I was glad he was hurting, but it was painful for me to see him suffer. Despite his infidelity, I still loved him. I thought I'd try to lighten the mood on Friday night with a special dinner for Mark. I made baked potatoes, grilled asparagus, and trout he caught a couple of weeks ago, seasoned with herbs, chili, garlic, and olive oil. It's one of his favorites, and I hoped it would help ease his mind a bit. It would also alleviate the guilt I was starting to feel. As I finished setting the table, the phone rang, disrupting the calm atmosphere. Taking out my earring, I answered, balancing the phone on my shoulder. Andrew's residence. The background noise was loud, and Mark's voice barely audible. Hi Diane, it's me, Mark. Some of the guys are going out tonight, and since you're going out tomorrow, I thought I'd join them. Don't wait up, I'll probably be out late. He hung up before I could respond. He sounded really upset, and for a moment, I questioned if my revenge was worth it. Why does he always do this? Probably out with his lover again tonight. Well, we'll see who has the better time. I struggled to sleep, tossing and turning until he returned at 3 a.m. I heard his door close, followed by the sound of his shoes hitting the floor. Then, silence. Saturday morning, I was up early, preparing another surprise for him. When Mark finally emerged around 12:30, he looked terrible. Still dressed in yesterday's clothes, he appeared disheveled and bleary-eyed. His shirt was stained, and his pants were muddy. He barely grunted in response to my cheerful greeting, which was more to irritate him than anything else. I handed him his dinner, now resembling charcoal after 2 hours in a high-temperature oven. It took him a moment to realize what I'd done. Pushing the plate away, he groaned, very funny. After finishing his coffee, he stumbled back to bed to sleep off his hangover. Maybe he was with the guys last night. He certainly wouldn't have been much use in bed in his condition. Maybe she dumped him. That thought brought a smile to my face. Well, Mark, if you think you feel bad now, just wait until I come home tonight or whenever. Saturday flew by. With Mark out of the picture, I could take my time getting ready without worrying about his judgment. Not that I cared much at this point. This plan had a momentum of its own, and I was merely along for the ride. By 6, I was almost ready, just putting on my dress. I decided to forego a bra or panties for 2 reasons. Andy might appreciate my body more if he felt me up while dancing, and I didn't want to risk losing expensive underwear. Mark came out of the shower as I was choosing my shoes. I hadn't realized he got up and used the guest bathroom. He walked into our room and saw what I was planning to wear. Diane, are you really going out with the girls dressed like that? Do you have a date? Please, let's talk this out. Don't do this. His pleading tone irritated me, making me angrier. I snapped back. I already told you, I'm going out with the girls. We can talk when I get back. Maybe then you'll listen. Now, get your things and go. I need to finish getting ready or I'll be late. Mark's response surprised me. His voice was firm, lacking any sign of weakness. Diane, I know you're cheating on me. I don't know with whom, but if I find out, he'll be named in the divorce. Your distant attitude these past weeks, and now this, lead me to one conclusion: you're having an affair. A tear escaped his eye, quickly brushed away. I won't be made a fool of. If I find proof of your infidelity, our marriage is over. Think about that before you leave tonight. As he grabbed his clothes, I retorted, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. He didn't understand, but left to dress in the guest room, assuming the moral high ground. Little did he know, once his own cheating was exposed, he wouldn't be so confident. Or at least, that's what I hope to believe. Before leaving, I left a note on the fridge, knowing Mark's tendency to reach for a beer when faced with a problem. Mark, you know I love you, but these past 2 weeks have been torture. We need to talk. I'll be home by 2 a.m. Please wait for me. I want to work through our issues and save our marriage. All my love, Diane. Andy was waiting for me when I arrived, dressed to impress. His bold attire made my heart race. His kiss caught me off guard, passionate but inexperienced. I knew I'd have to show him how to truly please a woman. At last, he let go of me and guided me to his car. The restaurant isn't too far. I hope you're into Italian. Italian cuisine isn't exactly my favorite, but I can tolerate it. Sure, I love Italian food. Lead the way. The restaurant was bustling with noise and packed with people. Not exactly the romantic ambience I had hoped for. I'd have to wait until we got to the club for a more intimate atmosphere. To my surprise, the food was actually delicious, and I found myself enjoying it. At one point, I even thought about bringing Mark here someday. Andy seemed to be a regular here, greeted by name by the staff and the owner, a jovial Italian woman who kept giving him knowing looks and thumbs-up gestures. By 8, we had finished our meal and 2 bottles of wine, ready to head to the club. It was just a short walk away, and we chatted as we strolled. I could feel the envious glances from other girls as I walked arm in arm with Andy. You seem pretty popular back there. Is this a usual spot for you? I asked. Yeah, I usually take my dates there. Sets the mood for later, you know, he replied. I grunted in response, thinking it wasn't exactly the most romantic setting. But Andy was still learning the ropes, and I was sure he'd catch on quickly. As we approached the club, Andy slipped his arm around my waist and then up to my breast. It felt nice, but with people waiting in line, I felt a bit uncomfortable. I gently pushed his hand away, whispering, "Later, lover." I started to join the back of the line, but Andy had other plans. He casually walked up to the bouncer, exchanging greetings and slipping him some cash. We were granted immediate entry, much to the annoyance of those waiting. Inside, the music was deafening, and the dance floor was packed. We found a corner to catch our breath and maybe have a little more fun in the darkness, where inhibitions were lowered. I took charge, initiating a deep French kiss to show Andy how it's done. He responded with a kiss that left me breathless, his tongue exploring my mouth with fervor. When we finally came up for air, I realized he was a quick learner. For the next hour, we indulged in some heavy petting. His hands roamed under my dress, and I felt his erection. It wasn't as large as Mark's, but Andy's enthusiasm made up for it. By 9:30, I was getting into the groove, the music drowning out the chaos around us. But Andy had other plans. We should go. The motel is just across the street. But Andy, I'm enjoying myself. Can't we stay longer? No, we need to be there by 10, or they'll give the room away. It's a popular spot on Saturdays. Grabbing my hand, Andy led me through the crowded street, narrowly avoiding cars and cursing at honking drivers. This night was turning into a disaster, and I resolved that it would be my first and last with Andy, unless he proved himself in bed. And he did. Once inside the motel room, Andy wasted no time, stripping off my dress. I tried to slow him down, but he was eager to please. Relax, let me show you, I said. Wiggling his eyebrows, Andy smirked. I've never had any complaints. I rolled my eyes. How many girls have you been with? Girls? I stopped messing around with them when I was 17. You wouldn't believe how many older women were after me during my high school days. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Had he not learned anything from those experiences? Let's take it slow, I suggested, but Andy had other ideas. He dropped his boxers and pushed me to my knees. Before I could protest, he guided himself into my mouth. I realized then that I had made a mistake. It was too late now, I had to see it through. I resolved to finish quickly and head home. Well, that was my plan, but as they say, things don't always go as expected. Once Andy was aroused, he pulled me to the bed, positioned me over it, and began thrusting forcefully from behind. Doggy style is usually enjoyable for me, but tonight, it did nothing. Despite starting the night aroused, I was dry now. The friction was painful, and I could feel bruising in my sensitive areas. I hoped Mark would appreciate the sacrifice I made to salvage our marriage. As Andy continued, I couldn't help but compare his rough approach to Mark's gentle lovemaking. Mark always prioritized my pleasure, ensuring I climaxed before penetration. I realized I should have confronted Mark and forgiven him for his mistake. Instead, I found myself enduring this encounter with Andy, who seemed more interested in his own satisfaction than mine. Finally, Andy finished, asking, "How was that? How was that?" I could barely move after that rough encounter, and I hadn't experienced a single orgasm. As Andy lay there satisfied, I knew Mark would make it up to me later. "It was fine," I replied, hastily dressing. "But I have to go. I have plans with my husband." Andy protested, eager to continue, but I was in a hurry to leave. However, his next words shocked me. "You can't leave. My friends are coming over. I told them you'd be up for it." He believed I would agree to be with multiple men? I was furious. "Who do you think you are?" "I'm not that kind of woman," I retorted. Andy dismissed my protest, labeling me as a cheater and implying I was promiscuous. His audacity infuriated me. "I see a married woman cheating on her husband," he said callously. "Now come back here. I want to try something else." I was appalled. Andy's disrespect and presumption were beyond belief. Gathering my belongings, I left, feeling disgusted and violated. Fate was not on his side when the closest object within reach happened to be the bedside lamp. Its hefty ceramic base connected with his head, rendering him unconscious. Uncertain if I had caused serious harm, I checked his vital signs. He seemed okay, albeit with a bleeding cut and an impending headache. Well, he had brought it upon himself. Gathering my belongings, I hurried out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar for his friends to find him. Tears clouded my vision as I sprinted the 3 blocks back to my car, where I collapsed into the driver's seat. It took a moment for my trembling hands to steady enough to start the car. What had started as a promising date had turned into a nightmare. I was livid and disillusioned with Andy's deceitful facade. He had fooled me with his innocent act, and I had fallen for it like a fool. Call me old-fashioned, but I expected some level of romance on a date. This modern approach seemed devoid of any genuine seduction. What stung the most was Andy's assumption that I would be willing to engage in such a degrading scenario with his friends. Had I unwittingly projected that image? The drive home was a blend of shame and anguish. I couldn't blame Mark for this mess. I had brought it upon myself and now had to face the consequences. On the bright side, any lingering arousal had dissipated. As I pulled into the driveway, I braced myself for what awaited. Mark was waiting in the living room, and his expression shifted from surprise to shock as I stumbled in. Whether it was my early arrival or my disheveled appearance, hair tousled, makeup smeared, one shoulder of my dress hanging loose, and shoes still in the car, I certainly looked like someone who had been through a rough time. "You did it. All that talk about loving me, wanting to salvage our marriage. What was that about? Did you think I would just overlook this and move on? I hope you're satisfied, you slut," he spat. His words cut deep. I was the second person tonight to be branded with that derogatory term, and I had reached my limit. Now listen here. None of this would have happened if you had kept your impulses in check. I know about your escapade at the Hyatt in Carlton 2 weekends ago. You were spotted with some blonde. So spare me the moral lecture. All I did was seek a bit of retribution to make you understand how I felt. Now, we need to have a conversation and figure out how to move forward. I'll make some coffee, and we can sit down like we used to and sort through this, I declared, pausing to catch my breath and allowing Mark to respond. I don't know who they saw, but it wasn't me. I was 200 kilometers away, fishing on the other side of the state, just like I said, he retorted, his confidence wavering. It was time to play my trump card. Jane saw you. She was there with her husband, and they witnessed you with another woman. Also, I found these in your fishing jacket. I tossed the matches at him. How come Dave caught fish that weekend, but you didn't? Because you were not fishing, you were. I couldn't bring myself to finish the sentence. Exhausted, I sank into a nearby chair. Okay, I'm waiting for your excuses, or maybe, just maybe, you could tell the truth for once. Seated across from me, Mark's gaze drifted downward, and I realized that my dress had ridden up, exposing my intimate area and the dried evidence of what had transpired earlier. The expression of repulsion on Mark's face sent a chill down my spine, and I trembled. First, Dave hardly ever catches fish, but he enjoys the getaway with us. Sometimes we give him a couple to keep his wife happy, or, as in this case, he buys some on the way back. The matches aren't mine, they belong to Steve. He travels for work and probably picked them up during a trip. He gave them to me to light the lamps one night, and I must have accidentally put them in my pocket. Mark's frustration was palpable, and I had to concede that either he was telling the truth or he was incredibly quick on his feet. But what about Jane seeing you? Can you explain that? I don't know any Jane, so I can't explain it. However, I can prove that I was on the other side of the state Saturday afternoon. Mark retrieved his wallet and produced a gas receipt from a station on the other side of the state, dated exactly as he claimed. He handed it to me for verification. It even bore his car registration details. As I inspected the receipt, I recalled seeing it in his wallet during a previous check. This wasn't unfolding as I had anticipated. But Jane said, "Who is Jane?" Mark interrupted, his tone sharp. "I've heard you mention her, but I've never met her. When I do, I'll certainly have a word with her. Why would she want to sabotage our marriage? What have I done to offend her?" He was right, Jane had never met him. How did she know it was him? Perhaps she had seen his photo on my desk one too many times. That had to be it. While I contemplated this, Mark disappeared into the kitchen, likely to grab another beer so we could discuss the situation further. "Here are your things. Let me know where you're staying, and I'll send the rest over." Mark returned with 2 suitcases, which he deposited at my feet. He retrieved my purse, extracted the house key, and handed it back to me. "I have an appointment with a lawyer on Monday to file for divorce. I've transferred half of our joint funds into my own account, and whatever remains in the joint account is yours. Now, please leave." This was all wrong. Mark was supposed to understand, to forgive, and to promise to be faithful. What had gone so terribly awry? Even after being caught, he denied his infidelity. He had explanations for everything else, but not for that. Maybe he had switched cars with Steve or someone, and they had gotten gas to cover for him. It had to be some kind of macho reaction, an attempt to take control. Once he cooled down, we could work through this. "Fine, I'll leave, but let's discuss this before you rush off to hire a divorce lawyer. You'll see things differently once you've calmed down." Gathering my belongings, I carried them out to the car, unsure of where to go next. Going to my mom's house seemed unappealing, especially looking as disheveled as I did. The local hotel was my only other option. I must have raised a few eyebrows when I walked into their lobby looking like I belonged on the streets. They gave me a room, but with strict instructions, no men allowed. Who could blame them? I summoned all the strength I had to give Mark his space. For 2 weeks, I waited for him to come to his senses and return to me. When I couldn't wait any longer, I called him at home. As soon as he heard my voice, he hung up. I tried calling back twice, but he did the same each time. An hour later, I attempted again, but the line was busy. He had taken the phone off the hook. The next day, I tried calling him at work, but the receptionist informed me that he wasn't accepting calls from me. If I had anything important to discuss, I should contact his lawyer. Mark remained steadfast in his refusal to communicate with me. For 3 months, I pleaded with him to see things from my perspective. If I could forgive his infidelity, why couldn't he? With each passing day, my frustration grew. Why couldn't he understand my side? My anger dissipated, replaced by depression and tears. My life had unraveled, and I didn't know why. I attempted to wait for him at home, but he ignored me, closing the door in my face. The following day, I was served with a restraining order at work, prohibiting me from contacting Mark directly or coming within 100 meters of him. Andy ensured his revenge by spreading rumors at work about what had transpired between us. Despite my denials, my coworkers believed his version of events. I was bombarded with unwanted attention until I finally stood up for myself by confronting Andy. Unable to afford the hotel any longer, I moved back in with my parents. They sympathized but reminded me that I should have tried to communicate with Mark. As my dad put it, 2 wrongs don't make a right. I held on to the hope that Mark wouldn't go through with the divorce. Maybe he was just trying to intimidate me into apologizing. But how could I apologize if he wouldn't even talk to me? I remember that Tuesday vividly. I was wrapping up some work at my desk when the receptionist called to inform me that there were 2 men waiting to see me. Assuming they were salesmen, I put on a smile and went to meet them. There stood Mark with another man, speaking quietly. My heart raced. Had he forgiven me? Mark nodded toward me and said something to the other man, who then approached me. Mark stayed back, not participating in what was happening. It was then that I knew our marriage was truly over. Diane Andrews? The man's statement was more of a question, and I could only nod in response, unable to find my voice. You are being served with divorce papers by your husband, Mark Andrews. The grounds are your adultery. If you don't have a lawyer, I suggest you get one as soon as possible. After completing his task, the man nodded to Mark and left. Mark, no. I thought you loved me. How could you do this to us? I love you. I know we have issues, but if we love each other, we can work through them, right? Mark's voice was cold and detached. I did love you with all my heart. But you shattered that love and took my heart with it. Now all I feel for you is pity. You chose to believe someone who doesn't even know me. Where is this woman anyway? I have a few words for her. Yes, she can prove that you cheated, and we can fix this. I'll go get her. Hurrying to the front desk, I asked the receptionist to page Jane for me. When Jane arrived, I thought I could finally get Mark to admit the truth. Jane, tell Mark what you saw that weekend at the hotel. Jane shrugged and recounted her story. I saw your husband with another woman staying there. Mark gasped. You saw me at the Hyatt in Carlton? Jane shook her head. No, I saw her husband, not you, and it wasn't the Hyatt in Carlton. We stayed at the Regent in West Bend. Mark and I were both baffled, but for different reasons. What was she talking about? Then Jane turned to me. I don't know what's going on here, but I saw the same man who used to pick you up for lunches and after work. The man you took with you on that 3-day conference in August 2 years ago. You introduced him to us as your husband, Wally. Fear gripped me as I realized she was referring to a guy I had a brief affair with 2 years ago. Jane didn't know my husband at all. It dawned on Mark at the same moment, and a look of triumph crossed his face. He turned and left, calling out for all to hear, "See you in court." My fate was sealed.